Just like previous sections, before learning and knowing how to fix or how to edit exposure in Lightroom, we need to understand what is exposure. Exposure is the amount of light that reaches your camera while taking photos. Or in a simpler way, exposure is how bright or how dark your image is. Inside your camera, there are three camera settings that affect exposure. They are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. What is shutter speed? Shutter speed is the time that your camera spends taking picture, or how long your camera sensor is exposed to light. What is aperture? Aperture is like pupil of your camera. Just like your eyes, when in the dark, it gets wider, and when the light is too harsh or there is too much light, it gets tighter and less light in your camera sensor. The next setting is ISO. ISO is the sensitivity of light in your camera sensor. Each of the settings that I have named, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, also have, you can say, creative side effects. For shutter, if we go for longer shutter speeds, we will get long exposures. Or if we go for shorter shutter speeds, we will get faster and very sharp images. And for aperture, if we go too wide, we get a shallow depth of field and much less focus area. And if we go tighter, we will get too much in focus. And an ISO, if we go too high in ISO, we will add grain in our image. So in this ways, while taking pictures in your camera, be careful of these settings and their side effects. Keep in mind and go with that accordingly. For each genre of photography, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO differs. You cannot set a specific shutter speed setting or aperture or ISO to match all of your photography. In low lights, you need wider apertures and longer shutter speeds or higher ISO. But by doing that, you might add grain, you might add blurry images, and much less shallow depth of field. Your work as a photographer is to manage and to compromise and know which setting to use and which settings you don't use. And also the most important thing is that you should know the capability of your camera and remember how much of the details camera can capture. And if you're able to bring back the lost details back in the editing in Lightroom, you should know how much of the shadows you can bring back, how much of the details you can get from the highlights. This will help you while editing and this will make you a better photographer. Shooting your photos or taking images, keep these points in your mind and also consider the editing process of your image because half of the photography is editing. See you in the next lecture while I explain how to fix and how to edit exposure in Lightroom.